Hey guys, David Johnston here. This is day 27 of crypto, DeFi, and PegNet talks that I've been giving. And today I want to talk about PegNet attacks. This is very relevant because 2 days ago, a miner launched an attack on the PegNet network in the early hours of Tuesday morning. And the important thing to emphasize is zero user funds were lost. And I'll explain why. PegNet, as you probably know by now, has no reserve. PegNet has no central collateral. There's no smart contract with a common pool of funds that's available to drain. All miners do in PegNet is publish Oracle prices. They're not involved in conversions. They're not involved in transactions. They're just saying, here's the price for all of these assets. So when this miner launched an attack on Tuesday morning, what they did was alter the price of Japanese yen. And they said, oh, it's much higher than it really is. And they had enough hash power to push out the honest miners that were submitting the correct price. And while the price was high, they converted a little bit of that Japanese yen into peg dollars. And they were able to turn 11 bucks into 6.7 million, at least inside their own wallet. Now, there's some safety mechanisms inside PegNet that make it impossible for an attacker like this to then convert into peg and dump on the market. So they couldn't really take these tokens out of the system. It wouldn't let them do that. So after a few hours, the attacker reached out and said, hey, send me a burn address. I'm going to go ahead and destroy those $6.7 million of tokens that I created. And that's exactly what happened. One of the community developers sent a burn address to the attacker, and sure enough, a few minutes later, they sent the tokens into that burn address, and now they are destroyed and removed from the system forever. You can still see them on the blockchain, but they can't be spent. They can't be converted. The wallet can't be recovered by anybody. If you're familiar with how burn addresses works, burn addresses, to recover them would require more computation than is available in the current universe. So we can say that it's safely destroyed. Now, the way PegNet is designed is fundamentally different than most other applications. We talked about the fact that it doesn't have a reserve or collateral, and that's why no user funds could be taken, but also the safeguards that are in the system prevented from the user diluting or dumping those tokens on the market, or at least converting them into peg. And so the story gets even more interesting. I asked the attacker who had reached out, what was the motivation? And he said, I looked at the game theory and, I looked at the code logic and I wanted to test the limits, right? And that's evidently what he did in a very sort of large stunt that gained everybody's attention and brought to the fore sort of how do you improve oracles beyond sort of having lots of proof of work, which is the model today in PegNet. And the story gets even stranger. The attackers actually now reached out and made a lengthy proposal about how to improve the oracles on PegNet using a mix of proof of work from current miners, proof of work from past miners, proof of stake from users. You could effectively split up the groups that are reporting the prices every 10 minutes and compare those different groups and see if you have a divergence. So for those in the security community, you might call this a white hat hacker. Somebody who is sort of provocatively pushing the limits of a system, but ultimately is trying to improve that system. If that's the case, it's hard to say. All you can really do is judge by the actions. They created these tokens in their own wallet. They destroyed these tokens in a burn address, and then they put forth this proposal for improving the security of the network. And I had written an article myself just a few weeks ago. I think I published it about a week ago on my Medium about how to de-risk oracles. And this is a similar concept where I go through the 4 layers of how data flows through users, exchanges, aggregators, and then finally miners to be included in the PegNet data that gets published and is used by the PegNet wallets. And so, if we look at that article, this effectively fits into the miner bucket. How do we know and increase the cost of publishing bad data? And what this white hat hacker has proposed is effectively a way to make it more expensive. One, for somebody to do this, they'd have to have a majority, not just of the hash power, but of the P assets, or if you staked peg, it'd have to have a majority of the peg. Basically, you can get the different stakeholders in the system involved in securing the prices in the system. Now, the second thing you want to do is lower the benefit, right? Effectively, they're able to create this absurdly high price for the Japanese yen, but there's ways in the software that you could look for these type of erroneous data and say that's an error or that's malicious, we're not going to include it. And that would sort of be the second step. Once you are looking at these different price reports from different groups, you want to say, okay, what's a reasonable range that we're expecting as far as movements in the market or divergence in data between these different groups that might be using different sources, and detect any anomalies that, let's say, are outside a 1% band, and say that's probably erroneous. We're going to pause conversions for a block on that asset so that nobody's conversions get messed up. So that's one way to approach it, but there's other parts of how you make oracles more robust. One of them is to look at the aggregators. So this is an improvement that was recently made on PegNetMarketCap.com. Is they get exchange API data from all over. Sometimes those APIs are wrong and just publish bad data. And so they look through that data, and once they see something that having an observed spike, they can detect that and exclude that from what gets reported to miners. So we can see the increase of honest data from aggregators like PegNet MarketCap. Now, if you go one more step down to the exchanges, Coinbase did something interesting today. They're going to start signing Bitcoin and Ethereum to dollar pair prices that come off of Coinbase Pro. So if you're building an app and you want to pull from that data set, now you have a signed proof that that price did in fact come from Coinbase. So this is an example of a first exchange saying, hey, we recognize people are using our data. We're going to sign that data so you know it's at least coming from us and not from somebody else. So hopefully we see more and more exchanges emulate that type of approach. Now, there's nothing to say that somebody who is a user of Coinbase Pro couldn't try to push around that price, and that would sort of be user manipulation of a price, knowing that people are using that oracle. But that's, again, something exchanges can look for in user behavior to see if there's something going on there. So there are things that can be done at the user level, the exchange level, the aggregator level, and the mining software level to make these systems more and more robust. And the way I think about it is I'd say thank you to the white hat that did this, because it really gives focus to this need to continue improving this security model. Because if we want billions and trillions of dollars to move into these systems, they have to have the kind of resiliency where no single actor can really mess with them. And fortunately, again, PegNet was built in a way where there's no way for them to touch anybody else's funds. But even you want to eliminate this possibility of bad data getting into the system in the first place. So check out the article that I wrote on de-risking oracles. I think this is extremely timely. The PegNet community is having a big discussion about, okay, what are the things that make sense to include next as a way to avoid this in the future? But overall, unlike other hacks we've seen, no user funds were lost. And so, I think that's a big improvement over the existing systems, and shows why we don't want custody and reserves and collateral that are at risk and that can be drained. So, I'll call it there, but this is a really fascinating topic. There's a lot to discuss. Check out the article on de-risking oracles, but All blockchains live in this adversarial open system, and it's all about incentives. So the gauge for the community going forward is how expensive can it make it for attackers, and how little do they gain if they do an attack. So for example, if you needed a majority of the peg ownership, a majority of the P assets, a majority of the hash power now, a majority of the hash power in the past in order to run this attack, it would make it much more expensive. And if all you could do was increase a price by 1%, it would really not make it worth it, right? So you have to both increase the cost of an attack and reduce the benefit of the attack. I mean, we see this with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Their proof of work models have huge amounts of hash power that now secure them, but also there's not much you can gain by gaming them in the first place. You can maybe try to double spend a transaction very briefly, but most exchanges and other places wait for multiple transaction confirmations anyway. So are you going to spend $1 billion messing with a network to make a few grand maybe on a double spend? It doesn't make any sense, right? So what we need is for PegNet and similar systems to get to those type of economics where the cost is extremely high and the benefit is extremely low, and then confidence will continue to build in these systems. So anyway, I'll include a link to the technical report from Who, one of the community developers that wrote up the analysis. I'll include the link to my article. But yeah, love to see people's questions about these attack vectors, and sort of how the community is thinking through all of this. But really great demonstration, I think, of why decentralization wins and why it's the best way to protect users going forward. So I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Enjoy your day. Remember, be awesome to one another. Wear a mask, wash your hands, and crypto on. Take care, my friends. Bye.